All right, good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Sean Callan.
Here.
Julie Chetney.
Here.
Tom Chiappa.
Here.
David Christofoli.
Here.
Jim McKenzie's here. Chris Norfleet.
Here.
And Sean Onmock. And Amanda Connolly. All right, if we can stand for the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we've made one adjustment on the agenda from what was posted on Friday to move our student representative up, because Ms. Connolly has another school obligation later on, so.
Thank you for that. We just had one thing. Students are wondering if there's going to be a driver's ed teacher anytime soon, and they're really hoping that there will be. So that's all.
Okay.
That's actually a really good question. Countywide, we have struggled to find driver's ed teachers. Driver's education has a couple of certification requirements, both for classroom instruction and then for the actual driving piece. And so I think all of us in Oswego County don't have someone currently. We had contracted with BOCES for a long time. It was a shared service, all work together. And so we have been collaborating, looking for ways, how do we find individuals who might be willing, and then how do we help and support them get certification? So the answer is part one, we are looking to try to facilitate getting someone or a number of individuals certified. And part two, I don't know the timeline. I don't anticipate that we'll have someone at any time this year. But if anyone is interested and wants to learn more about that, they can feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to give them more information about that certification process.
Okay, thank you. I'll let them know.
Thanks, Amanda.
Excellent. All right, next on the agenda is the floor to public, in which we didn't have anybody sign up this evening. So we're to acknowledgements with Tom Chiappa.
All right, this evening we start out at all 5 elementary buildings. Omega Man recently visited all 5 Oswego elementary buildings to share what it means to be a hero. H, helping. E, everyone. R, respect. And O, others. We want a huge thank you to send out to the Garrett Dunsmore Memorial Foundation for making his visit possible. Now we'll move over to athletics. Winter postseason play, sectional games. The Unified Bowl won their division at the event culminating at the end of the season. And cheer placed third at sectionals. Girls hockey lost to Clinton 3-0 in the sectional semifinal game, which was hosted here. We also hosted the boys hockey sectional play, in which Oswego lost in overtime to Clinton 3-2. Boys basketball lost to ESM 76-74 in the sectional quarterfinal game, and girls basketball lost to Henniger 50-33 in the sectional quarterfinal game. The NISVISA meet qualifiers. You like that? That's my new acronym. Thank you. You like that? That's a New York State Public High School Athletic Association, or NISVISA. The qualifiers we're sending there for indoor track is Daniel Dunn, and for swim, it's Cooper Dawson. Daniel Dunn in the 600 meters and Cooper Dawson in the 200 free. Well, I go over now to Charles E. Riley, where the Battle of the Books was a rousing success with a variety of comprehensive questions posed to some voracious readers in grades 4 through 6. Beginning Band held a concert on February 12th with Mrs. Jorgensen leading the charge. The students have already shown so much growth and musical readiness as they played short pieces for their parents. Now over to Layton School, where the Layton School Spelling Bee champion, 6th grader Sean Hosin, he has moved on to the next level, and he will be competing March 22nd in Syracuse. Congratulations. And staying at Frederick Layton School on the right there, you'll see all the winners for the character trait for the month of February, and the trait was problem solving. And now over to Minetto. Oh, look at Think Spring, shouldn't we all? Minetto would like to thank our building and grounds crew. They worked tirelessly to remove snow and open the parking lots there. Thank you to Buildings and Ground for all the work with the crazy amount of snow that we had. And we're going to the high school now, where the Oswego Winter Guard were placed first in their class at CNS. Congratulations. The jazz ensembles participated in the New Hartford Jazz Festival. Both bands received a gold rating, and the Jazz Ensemble A was awarded Best Rhythm Section of the festival. All-Star Awards were presented to Kyan McCarthy, Josiah Rotulo Khan, Xavier Vasquez, Zach Wills, Shane Baldwin, Leonard Lynn, Maya Roper, Grant Romanowski, and Nate Carr. And we'd also send our congratulations to Mr. Defrin, who's the director. The senior class hosted the semi-formal at the Elks Lodge. Over 250 students attended, and a great time was had by all. And finally, March is Music in Our Schools Month, so please support our talented student musicians during one of the many events throughout the next several weeks. So anybody who's sitting at home and you see this, if you go onto Facebook, it is posted, and if you can share it with all your friends, that would be greatly appreciated, because the more people we get to turn out to experience these events, the better it is for all our students and for all the teachers and everybody who puts a hard work on these programs. So that's it. Thank you very much. And now back to you, Jim.
Thank you, Tom. All right, next up, we have the superintendent's report. Dr. Kilmer.
I'm going to invite Amanda Caldwell and Sean Morgan to come forward to present on curriculum.
Did you turn us on, Matt? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kilmer. So at about this time last year, I was here talking with you all about our district comprehensive improvement plan as a result of our accountability determination. This is round 2 of that presentation, but not to be the last. So our accountability determination for the 24-25 school year has the district now designated in 2 subgroups of students at 2 different levels. I have Mr. Sean Morgan here with me this evening, who is our Director of Data and Accountability, because he is far more fluent and articulate about the algorithm and the data that led to our designation, so that we all have a broader understanding of how we got here. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to him momentarily, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the planning process that leads to our improvement plan this spring, who's involved in that planning process, and ultimately what is required of us in terms of making plans to move forward. So.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time and kind of review the process of accountability in New York State, so we all have a solid understanding of what the designations mean and how they actually are determined. So here we go. In New York State, there is an accountability determination process that is applied to every school. And there are 3 levels of classification. The one level, or I'd call the level that used to be considered good standing, is local improvement. So there is a belief that every school, no matter how well they are doing, must continually improve. There is a second layer of classification called targeted improvement. And these are schools and districts that score in the bottom 10% on specific criteria across the state. And then there is a third designation called the comprehensive improvement. And those would be schools and districts that are persistently in the bottom 10%. Persistently is open to interpretation, but those determinations are made for that specific level every 3 years. The other 2 are determined on a yearly basis. And not only are schools and districts classified and ranked, so these determinations are based on rankings from the very highest performing school and district to the very lowest performing school and district in the state. They are also ranked in different categories, and they're listed up there, but race and ethnicity, economically disadvantaged, English language learners, and students with disabilities. So there's quite a few rankings that are put out there, and there are quite a variety of ways to end up being identified as a school needing targeted improvement, or a district needing targeted improvement, or a subgroup needing targeted improvement. And for our purposes today, based on last year's academic data, apologize for that. Based on last year's academic data, the 24-25 designations have come out, and the Oswego County or Oswego City School District has been identified as a targeted district in 2 specific areas. One of them is the subgroup of Hispanic students, and that would be at the high school level. And that was the same designation we held last year as a district. And the other is now a new identification, and that is for the K-8 level, and that is for our Black or African American student subgroup. And this, as it says up there, is a new identification for us. Now, we are identified as a district in each of those areas, not as a school. So, when you think about the 6 schools, the 5 elementary and the middle school, and you put them into one group, as a district, they have been identified. So what that means is in that subgroup, at that level, when you rank us as compared to every district across the state, those students are achieving in the bottom 10% across, compared to other districts in the state. At the high school level, it's a little more confusing because we only have one high school. So technically on the school list, Oswego High School is not identified. They are a school in good standing. But when you do when they create the district list and they resort all the districts, and you end up with, for example, the city of Syracuse counting as 1 as opposed to 6, or Rochester counting as 1 as opposed to how many high schools they have, the number of schools that are being ranked and that percentage changes slightly. And so as a district, even though we only have 1 high school, we end up on a targeted district list. So before I go on, are there any questions about that piece of it? So there are multiple criteria that are used to determine whether or not a school is identified. And in our case, in our district, primarily what we're talking about are Regents exam scores for the high school and the state assessment scores in grades 3 through 8 for the K-8 designation. Chronic absenteeism, English language proficiency, college and career readiness are all other indicators that potentially can be used. But for our purpose, we are identified specifically because of the performance on these specific assessments. And to get even a little more targeted, the high school determination is based on last year's graduating class, the 2020 cohort, which is something to keep in mind when Mrs. Caldwell talks about developing a plan, because we're actually having to develop a plan for students who results caused us to be identified but do not exist in our system anymore, particularly at the high school. So it does make it a little bit more complex, but that's really the criteria that is used in our case that was used to determine that we are a targeted district in both areas.
Really quick, do you know how many Hispanic students graduated and what the overall graduating class was? I mean, what's the percentage of students?
So last year, yeah, I just looked that up. So last year's cohort, the 2020 cohort that graduated, there were 16 Hispanic students in that cohort. The current 2021 cohort that will graduate in June, that will be used to determine next year's accountability status, who won't be here, who we have to write a plan for, and we have to write a plan for the whole population. That group is 16 students. Our African American or Black subgroup last year was 25 students, and I think this year it was 24. So one of the reasons none of our schools will, at the K-8 level, are designated is because you have to hit a certain number of data points in order to qualify for the ranking. individually, none of our schools meet that criteria in the subgroups. But when you put them together and then every student is accountable for 2 or 3 scores, we cross the 30 data point threshold, and that's when you become a group that can be included in the rankings. So there are requirements that come out of this, and Mrs. Caldwell will speak to that in a minute, but we will need to complete a district comprehensive improvement plan, which will need to be submitted to New York State for approval. And that plan will be written to go into effect for the 25-26 school year. But I think as important as writing the plan, it's beginning to think about, well, how do we remove ourselves from these target designations? And it's fairly simple. You are not allowed to have the current subgroups cannot be in the bottom 10% on the next kind of round of accountability determinations. And you cannot have any potentially or newly identified groups in any area. To be identified as a targeted district or school, you must score in the bottom 10% 2 years in a row. If you are identified in any one group for the first time for 1 year, they identify that as potentially. So if we add any new groups to potentially being falling into kind of that category again, then we would not be able to come off any list, including or even if we were able to find success with our subgroups that are currently identified, if that makes sense. And just as a reminder, next year's determination will be based on the 2021 cohort, which is the current graduating class, and our current 3rd and 8th grade students. So the groups that are being identified are constantly changing as well, which does add another layer of complexity when you're trying to address how to meet the needs of students and see where we might be able to improve academic outcomes for them.
If we get identified in the Hispanic cohort again, that puts us on the comprehensive list, correct? Because we've already been on the target list.
So the comprehensive list comes out, is readjusted every 3 years. And I believe those determinations will come out next year because the process was paused for a few years due to COVID and then restarted. I can't speak with 100% certainty that if our Hispanic students remain and we remain a target district that we would move into a comprehensive identification, but I can look into that and get back to you. Yes.
So I have the much easier portion of creating our plan, less about figuring out the algorithm and more about thinking with our district team, what do we do with this data? So we are trying to get a little bit ahead this year in our planning process. And what I mean by that is last year as a newly identified district, because they had paused the accountability designation, this process was new to most of our administrative team, certainly new to Mr. Morgan and myself. Fortunately, last year when we created our improvement plans, we had just completed our Blueprint for Excellence strategic planning process. And a lot of the data that we reviewed for that process was the same data that the state asks us to review in creating our district and school improvement plans. This year, we are adding a more specific planning team to the layer of our planning because we are now designated in the K-8 realm. Last year, we were designated as just the high school. So we have added to our team to include 4 elementary principals, our middle school principal, and one of our high school assistant principals And I just want to make sure that everyone understands it would be 5 principals if Dr. Volkemer weren't retiring, but she gracefully bowed out, understandably so. Sean sits on that team as well as myself. So what we are required to do in the planning process is it's a 3-step process. We are required to analyze multiple data points that could potentially have led to our designation, or that could be data for further evaluation in helping remove our designation as a target district. We are also required to engage our subgroup populations for whom we are identified in listening sessions in some capacity. And whether that is, well, I'll get a little bit into that in the next couple of slides. And then taking the information that we learned from those 2 steps, we're supposed to consider whether or not what we have learned in step 1 and step 2 is aligned with the district's vision, mission, values, and goals as we have articulated them in the strategic plan. So step 1 is the data analysis process, and that's what we are currently engaged in with our planning team. We met last week, and we gave Mr. Morgan a whole laundry list of data sets that we would like to explore when we come back together the week after next. But some of the data that we are going to be considering is the data in our school district report card, which is very broad stroke, our enrollment, our percentage of students with disabilities, our percentage of Black and brown students, Hispanic students, students who are economically disadvantaged. But also in that report card, we can find data about our staff longevity in the district, potential staff turnover, and start to consider whether or not some of those adult factors are having an influence in our classrooms. We are fortunate also to have completed our school climate survey this past winter. A lot of the data that we will gather from that survey asks students to share with us how they are experiencing school. And one of the things that our team is interested in analyzing is whether or not our students in our identified subgroups are experiencing school differently than their peers. One of the things that Mr. Morgan started to allude to was that there are multiple data points that lead to our targeted designation, but when we fall in that bottom 10% across the state academically, all those other factors sort of become a moot point because the academics have to come first. But we also know that attendance and some other factors play into a student's academic performance. Kids who are not in school obviously can't learn. We're hoping to learn more from our school climate survey about what some of those other than academic factors are. Obviously, we're going to look at our performance data in ELA and math, in our Regents data at the high school level, student engagement data such as attendance, and then adult data such as attendance in that case and turnover rates. These data will be reviewed to identify variations that we see in subgroups. Is attendance better for our white students or our non-disabled students or students who are not economically disadvantaged? We know that the academic performance is better, but we're also interested in learning if students in other subgroups who are not identified are having better school experiences than our students who are identified. And then I've just put as a summary, the job of our DSIP team is to consider, based on this data, why these variations exist and create a plan based around those potential causes. Step 2 is to listen to the perspective of those identified groups. Our planning team has not gotten as far as determining what these listening opportunities will look like. One of the suggestions from the state is a survey, which we have done in the form of the school climate survey, but also potentially shadowing students, student interviews, or focus groups or roundtable listening discussions. And then, as I said, the third step in the process is then taking the information that we learned from the first two steps and sort of overlaying the district's strategic plan and making sure that what we are doing in terms of academics and plans that we put in place in terms of interventions for students also align with the values and the goals that are outlined in our strategic plan. So in essence, this is part one of a two-part presentation, because once that plan is complete by our DSIP planning team, we will come back to you and share what the entire plan is. Questions? Sure. No, you're fine. You're good.
Before it was suspended because of COVID, did we find ourselves on these lists?
I actually don't know. I will find out for you. Yeah. I think that the process for accountability designation is a little bit different. Sean, do you know?
I can speak from experience in working in a different district where I was leading a school that was on a list. I believe this process was fairly new right when we ran into kind of the pandemic and dealt with all those issues. I also know that New York State has sent a new plan to the federal government to make some adjustments in terms of how we're identifying subgroups and what is, I think, might be a way to represent these groups in a better way in terms of amount of data. And instead of currently we're in a system where I can say currently we're in a system where we're being ranked and we have to compete, so we could make significant improvement. But if everybody else does, we're in the same boat, we're still in the same percentile. They are recommending systems where there's a hard known target to hit, so then you can actually measure yourself against kind of something that you're doing as compared to trying to measure yourself against what everyone else is doing.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just had a question as far as the second phase of planning and a timeline overall for when, what do you approximate implementation, when you would start?
So we are here this evening because one of the requirements is that we notify the public and the Board of Education by March 4th. So it just so happens that we have a board meeting tonight about our accountability designation. Our actual plan to the state is due July 31st. So we will spend some time between now and the end of the year before that July 31st date developing the plan. We are anticipating within the next couple of weeks that our data from the school climate survey will be back to us, and that actually RMS will be here to present that data to you. So in terms of our timeline, our DSIP planning team is meeting again March 18th to look at our initial data that we have access to. Following the presentation from RMS regarding the school climate survey, which would be a component of that listening piece, we will come back together and think about are there opportunities then for our school principals or school counselors to engage individual students in those subgroups in further dialogue? Or Dr. Kilmer and I had talked about going a step further using a different survey platform and using our thought exchange based on the data that we have in the school climate survey to dig a little deeper. The school climate survey did not really give families and students too much of an opportunity to explain why they are feeling the way they're feeling. Thought exchange would do that if we identify data points that we want to probe further with. So it will still be, I would say, maybe early June, I think, would be an anticipated time for our plan to be complete.
And then to implement in 25, 26?
Yes, we're required to implement it September 2025, but I want to make sure that we have the plan in place and that our principals are well versed in the plan before we get to September, so that we're actually making and planning for meaningful change over the summer.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
Just to clarify too, whether or not we show up on a list doesn't stop the work that would always happen, which is constant focus on how do we help students improve. That work is ongoing. This is a formality because the state has very clear protocols if you identify, and so we follow through that. I don't want you to think, had we not shown up, we would have been, all good, nothing to do here.
Yeah.
That's never the case. And to go back to a question that Kristen had before, have we been on the list before? Some of our subgroups are on the very low end of even being recognized, right? So there could be a population change of 2 or 3 that suddenly takes us off the list, not because performance has improved. It's because we no longer hit the threshold of data points. That means it's measurable. And so that's a difficult piece too, right? So when you're at that low of a number to hit a threshold, 1 or 2 students can be a huge variability in percentage when you think about that. For us, and Amanda and her team, we've talked about this over all the principals, we are always looking at student performance data, trying to identify where students are finding success, where they're not, and what are we going to do to try to help move them forward. So this is one small piece of that work, but under no circumstances does this drive that work.
I think the only piece that I would add to that has actually, I think, been a benefit of this process is we do continually evaluate our data. I love the question that it has forced us to ask, and that is about whether or not our various subgroups, identified or not, experience school differently than our general population. I think that's an amazing question for us to start asking because our students are not all cut from the same cloth. We don't have cookie cutter kiddos. So it's an important question that I'm not sure we have really committed to asking in the past. So that's been good. Good.
Any questions, comments?
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Appreciate it. Superintendent's report, we do not have committee discussions, so we're to the consent agenda. As we typically do, I'd like to group our consent agenda items together, and so that would be items A through H. All right, so if I could please have a motion for consent agenda items A through H.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. A discussion, consent agenda items A through H. Okay, having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Is anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. There is a need for a short executive session for the purposes of personnel. If so, if I can have a motion to move to executive, please.
I'll move.
Thank you, Kristen. Is there a second? Thank you, Sean. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, we'll be back. Okay, so we're back. If I can have a motion to adjourn executive session, please?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Tom. Is there a second? Thank you, Kristen. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, so next on the agenda are personnel items. I'm going to group items A through I. So all of the listed personnel items. So if I can have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Julie. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, got Sean over here. All right, so we're doing personnel items A through I. Any discussion? Okay, having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, I'm going to, with your consent, I'm going to walk on a new agenda item. We're going to list it as personnel item J. And this is a resolution for the termination of an employee in accordance with Civil Service Law, Section 75. So if I can have a motion for that, please?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a personnel matter, so there is no discussion. Okay, so all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, so moving on from personnel, we're to finance. Again, we're going to group a series of donations and agreements together. So I'd like to group items, finance items A through F, please. If we can have a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, David. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. Any discussion on finance items A through F?
Just like to say thank you again for all the donations from both from Exelon, and also I'm glad we're doing the Leader in Me program again. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Tom. All right, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, motion carries. So that was finance. We're next to items from the board. So any board members have any particular items you'd like to share this evening? Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, actually tomorrow, right, Matt? I'm going to pull Matt on this. He popped his head up. An alumnus of Oswego High School, Ryan Mott, who's a news director at a television station down in the Capital Region, is going to be coming in and speaking with students in the program here. So it's great. And if there are any other alumni out there who would be interested in doing that, it'd be just a great thing for they can learn from the actual experience. So he'll be coming in tomorrow, and I just wanted to make note of that.
Great, thank you, Tom.
I just wanted to reinforce again the Music in Our Schools month and encourage people. This Saturday is the high school band concert. They've been working with a guest conductor all week. All three bands will be performing on Saturday night beginning at 7 p.m. with the guest conductor. And then on the 13th, the Oswego High School Wind Ensemble, which is the highest band at the high school, is performing with the middle school. I encourage people to go to that as well. It's really interesting to see the difference in a student from doing band every other day to doing band every day. And when they're both on the stage together, you can really see what the difference is. The other really great thing about that particular concert that they do is the high school does a really good job of trying to show middle school students that you can do all the things at the high school and also still be with the music program. So if you have a kid who's in elementary school or in middle school who's kind of wondering whether they want to keep with their musical instrument, it's a really great program to go to see that you can still be in the sports teams, you can still be in the clubs, you can still have a job, you can still be on all the different activities and still continue with your instrument. So I encourage people to go to both those concerts, 7 p.m. at the high school.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Any other board members this evening? Okay, there is not a need for another executive session, so I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting, please. Thank you, I got David. Is there a second?
second.
Julie? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, there is a board retreat pertaining to the budget after this, but this retreat is closed to the public. So I wish everybody a nice evening. Yes, ma'am. That began at 5 o'clock, and we always have floor to the public at the very beginning of the meeting. I'd be happy to speak with you afterwards, or Dr. Kilmer would, if there's something you'd like to speak to. Yeah, all right. Yes, absolutely. Okay.